The radar screens have finally cleared, offering a visual promise of safety that is entirely illusory. While the January 2026 North American winter storm, known officially as Fern, has dissipated from the satellite imagery, the catastrophe it ignited is still raging on the ground. We are witnessing a mass casualty event where at least 119 people have lost their lives across a frozen landscape stretching from Texas to New York. This is no longer just a weather report, it is an autopsy of a systemic collapse. Nearly 200,000 electrical customers remain trapped in dark, freezing homes in the Deep South, fighting hypothermia as the infrastructure fails around them. But the most terrifying aspect of this disaster is not what has already happened, but what is coming next. A new coastal threat, Winter Storm Giana, is currently forming and taking aim at the Carolinas and Virginia. The United States is not recovering, it is merely stumbling from one historic winter disaster straight into the path of another. Why did a modern nation's grid crumble so fragilely? How does a single week of snow erase 20,000 units of life, saving blood from hospitals? The true emergency is not the falling snow, it is the silence of a country waiting for the lights to come back on. To understand how we arrived at this breaking point, we must look back to the silence before the chaos. The storm that would eventually paralyze a nation began almost imperceptibly over the Pacific Ocean around January 21st. It was a standard low-pressure system that crossed the Rocky Mountains, but as it moved, it engineered a perfect atmospheric collision. It tapped into two massive, opposing reservoirs of moisture, one streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico, the other surging in from the Pacific. When this volatile, humid air mass slammed violently into a wall of Arctic air diving south, it detonated into one of the largest winter storms North America has witnessed in years. From the Four Corners region, Fern did not just move, it expanded, unfurling like a massive white rotating shield that swallowed the map. Between January 27th and the 30th, it swept with punishing force across the central United States, dug into the Deep South, and finally buried the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. The scale of the event was nearly incomprehensible. At the storm's peak, more than 230 million Americans were placed under winter storm, ice, or extreme cold alerts. Satellite imagery from NOAA captured a comma-shaped cloud shield that stretched for over 1,000 miles, wrapping around a deep, intensifying low-pressure center that seemed to feed on the continent's warmth. This atmospheric structure translated into a lethal combination on the ground: heavy snow burying the north, freezing rain glazing the south, and brutal wind chills cutting through everything in between. By the time the system finally began to weaken, it had exacted a horrific price. At least 19 people across the United States have been confirmed dead. But the devastation did not stop at the border. Impacts rippled north into Canada and south into Mexico, proving the continental scale of this event. In many tragic cases, the primary killer was not the falling snow itself, but the plunging temperatures that seized the landscape once the storm passed and the skies cleared. The infrastructure failure was immediate and widespread. At the height of the event, more than 1 million electrical customers were plunged into darkness. The Deep South was hit hardest, where the infrastructure faced a physics problem it could not solve. Heavy ice and wet snow accumulated on trees and power lines that were simply never designed to withstand such crushing weight. Simultaneously, the nation's transportation network suffered a catastrophic seizure. Between January 23rd and 26th, airlines canceled over 20,000 flights nationwide. On a single day, more than 11,000 flights were scrapped, transforming airport terminals from transit hubs into makeshift refugee camps for thousands of stranded travelers. When the sun rose on the coldest morning, the satellite view was stark. More than half of the lower 48 states were buried under a blanket of snow. All of this destruction would be enough to mark Fern as a historic anomaly. But for millions of Americans, the true crisis only began after the radar echoes faded. It began when the lights stayed off, the indoor thermometers kept falling, and the notifications about the next storm started to arrive. Right now, on the maps and satellite loops, Winter Storm Fern is technically history. The core low-pressure center has broken apart. Yet, on the ground, the last 24 hours have felt nothing like an ending. A deep, stagnant dome of Arctic air is currently locked over the Midwest, the South, and the East, pushing temperatures aggressively below late January averages. In rural valleys, wind chills have plummeted to levels capable of freezing exposed skin in mere minutes. According to surface temperature analysis from NASA and NOAA, vast stretches of the central and eastern United States are running dangerously colder than normal. This lingering cold has weaponized every remaining power outage. As of late January 30th, officials estimated that nearly 200,000 customers in Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, Kentucky, Virginia, and Texas were still without electricity. For many of these families, the blackout is not new. It began days ago when Fern first snapped the lines, leaving them trapped in a multi-day fight for warmth. Here is the important part. While the radar no longer displays a giant, rotating snowstorm, the humanitarian map tells a fundamentally different, far more urgent story. The crisis has simply moved from the sky to the ground. According to the American Red Cross, a massive relief operation is currently underway, with approximately 400 volunteers and staff working tirelessly across 13 separate states. The human cost was starkly visible on Thursday night alone, when roughly 2,800 people were forced to sleep in emergency shelters. These are families who had no choice but to try and stay warm on cots and gym floors as the temperatures outside plunge back toward deadly levels. At the federal and state level, agencies are not treating this as a cleanup operation. They are treating it as an active, unfolding winter disaster. The official government disaster portal was updated again on January 30th, urgently directing citizens to warming centers and local hotlines. The warning is explicit: communities that have already been battered by Fern must now immediately pivot and prepare for another dangerous system. A new coastal threat named Winter Storm Giana is lining up to bring blizzard conditions, coastal flooding, and yet more power outages to the East Coast. This is not a threat for next week. It is a threat for a matter of hours. If you were to walk into one of these emergency shelters tonight, the scale of this disaster would feel very different from the abstraction of a satellite image. The atmosphere is heavy. Gym floors are lined with rows of cots and folded blankets. Children play quietly with donated toys, trying to find normalcy in the chaos, while their parents huddle around extension cords, desperate to charge phones and check on relatives in other states. Many of these families have been displaced since the weekend, ever since the ice and wet snow from Fern snapped the power lines that feed their neighborhoods. They are sitting in limbo, waiting for two things that have not yet returned: heat and certainty. Red Cross workers describe a hauntingly similar pattern repeating across all 13 states. People arrive at the doors shivering, often after enduring hours or days in dark, unheated homes where the indoor temperature has dropped perilously close to the freezing mark. Volunteers are working to provide the basics of survival: hot drinks, simple meals, and critical information on where to find medical help for those dependent on oxygen, dialysis, or refrigerated medicine. In the more isolated rural counties, where the official safety net is stretched thin, local churches and community centers have spontaneously converted into unofficial warming stations. But inside the nation's hospitals, another quieter emergency is building to a crescendo. The same winter storm that paralyzed highways also paralyzed the medical supply chain. Since January 23rd, more than 500 blood donation drives have been canceled nationwide. The math is devastating. Over 20,000 units of blood and platelets were never collected. This is not just a logistical statistic. It represents a critical loss for trauma centers and cancer wards. Doctors are now being asked to prepare for a surge in traffic accidents, heart attacks, and cold-related emergencies, with a national blood supply that has plummeted by roughly 1/3 in a single month. And all of this is happening while the second Storm Giana lines up offshore, threatening to send even more patients into emergency rooms that are already operating at their absolute limit. For the communities caught in the crosshairs of Fern, the past week has been a harrowing descent into a compound disaster. There is the visible wreckage: massive snow drifts piled against frozen homes, broken tree limbs littering the streets, and exhausted power crews working 14-hour shifts to restretch lines that snapped under the sheer weight of ice. But beneath that lies the slower, less visible erosion of daily life. It is the weight of lost wages, the stench of spoiled food, and the sight of children out of school for days. Many families are burning through their life savings just to secure a motel room with heat and running water. In the Carolinas, the pressure is mounting once again. North Carolina's governor has issued a chilling warning. Some coastal and Outer Banks communities could face historic snow totals for the region. Parts of the barrier islands are bracing for up to 30 centimeters of snow, accompanied by ferocious winds and high surf. In counties like Dare, Brunswick, and Mitchell, leaders have already declared local states of emergency. They fear whiteout conditions and the high probability that Highway NC 20, the single artery along the Outer Banks, will be overwashed by the Atlantic Ocean. For these isolated towns, a road closure is a total blockade, cutting off the delivery of fuel, food, and life-saving medical supplies. South Carolina, a state where deep snow is a rarity, has also been forced to extend its statewide emergency order. Forecasters are calling for at least 10 centimeters of snow across much of the state, with interior counties potentially seeing as much as 30 centimeters. This wet, heavy snow is a predator for infrastructure. When combined with strong winds, it threatens to snap more trees and power lines, putting thousands of residents at risk of losing electricity exactly as the temperatures begin to plummet again. Even further south, the disaster is turning agricultural. In Florida's citrus belt, growers are watching thermometers with a sense of dread as overnight lows approach the freezing mark. A prolonged hard freeze could decimate this year's orange and grapefruit crops, adding a massive economic crisis to an already staggering list of winter impacts. Simultaneously, energy companies are warning that the grid is being pushed to its breaking point. They are preparing customers for possible rolling outages and even longer repair times if Winter Storm Giana inflicts new damage before the wreckage left by Fern can even be cleared. The national response has become a desperate relay race with no visible finish line. In the South and lower Midwest, utility companies are racing to repair last week's damage while prepositioning bucket trucks and extra crews closer to the looming threat in the Carolinas and Virginia. Mutual aid agreements have been activated, bringing line workers from hundreds of miles away to help restore power before the next round of wind and snow arrives. Emergency management agencies are operating on a frantic double track. Offices that have spent 10 straight days coordinating shelters and road plowing are now being forced to overhaul their plans for Giana. In the Carolinas, emergency declarations remain active to keep the flow of federal resources open and allow for the rapid movement of personnel. Local governments are using every available tool, from text alerts to social media, to push out maps of warming centers so that those who lose power again will know exactly where to flee. National relief organizations are extending their timelines in a desperate attempt to keep pace with the disaster. The American Red Cross and its partners are maintaining shelters across 13 states, while simultaneously scouting new locations along the East Coast as Giana threatens to force a fresh wave of evacuations. Volunteers are being rotated in a race against burnout, while logistics teams struggle to satisfy the mounting demand for blankets, cots, and medical transport. In the travel and energy sectors, the strategy has shifted from reaction to anticipation. Airlines have implemented flexible rebooking policies for East Coast airports, hoping to mitigate the chaos at already crowded terminals. Meanwhile, cargo operators and cruise lines are rerouting to avoid the high winds and rough seas generated by the approaching system. Regional grid operators are issuing stark warnings. The combination of record heating demand and new storm damage could lead to controlled load reductions, even in areas that managed to keep their power during Fern. When viewed in its entirety, the overlapping impact of Fern and Giana serves as a brutal stress test for the United States' ability to handle extreme climate events. The clearest lesson emerging from the ice is the fragility of our infrastructure. Power grids designed decades ago, particularly in the South, proved incapable of withstanding the physics of ice and record cold. Trees planted too close to lines and a lack of underground cabling turned heavy snow into a multi-day humanitarian crisis for hundreds of thousands. Transportation systems reached a similar breaking point. A single overwrought highway or a choked airport hub can effectively isolate entire communities from food and medical care. For businesses, a few days of total paralysis can ripple through national supply chains for weeks. There is also a deeper, more ominous climate signal at work here, one that scientists have been warning of for years. A warming atmosphere holds more moisture, meaning that when cold air and storm systems finally align, the result is heavier snow, more intense ice, and more violent swings between warmth and Arctic outbreaks. Fern utilized this added moisture to create one of the largest storm footprints in recent memory, and Giana is now preparing to tap into that same volatile pattern. Perhaps the most sobering realization is how quickly our essential systems can be pushed to their limits. Blood supplies evaporated, shelters filled, and emergency staff reached exhaustion before the second storm even made landfall. Tonight, as Fern fades into the history books and Giana swirls offshore, millions of Americans will remember this winter not by the names of the storms, but by the cold that seeped into their homes and the quiet fear of the lights going out again. From the citrus groves of Florida to the barrier islands of the Carolinas, this season has exposed the deep fragility of our modern world. Yet it has also revealed a stubborn resilience: neighbors sharing power, volunteers driving through sub-freezing winds, and hospital staff stretching dwindling supplies to save lives. As this historic winter continues to unfold, the question remains, how will we change our communities after seeing what this winter has revealed?